The shooting range felt like a proving ground. Sergeant Grace Mitchell gripped the rifle with weathered hands, her 48-year-old fingers dancing across the controls she'd studied for months before requesting this opportunity. The wind gauge showed a challenging 15-knot crosswind as she peered through, the scope at a target that seemed impossibly distant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marksman on the line, crackled the range officer's voice. You've got one shot, Mitchell. Don't waste our time. Grace's jaw tightened. She adjusted her position, controlling her breathing as she'd practiced countless times alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. 23 years in law enforcement had carved discipline deeper than bone. The wind shifted slightly. She waited. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. At the precise moment, she squeezed the trigger with perfect pressure, watching the bullet's trajectory in her mind. Hit, came the stunned announcement over the loudspeaker. Grace lowered the rifle, her salt and pepper hair damp with sweat. Through the range's observation window, she could see Commander Jackson Bennett standing with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. At 39, Bennett was the youngest tactical training director in the department's history, his career adorned with commendations from high-risk operations and hostage rescues. His career was ascending while hers had plateaued years ago, and her request to join the elite sniper training program was scheduled to be officially denied in exactly 72 hours. The range door opened with a metallic clang. Grace stood, her knees protesting only slightly. She'd outlasted younger officers who'd washed out from night shifts, undercover operations, and the psychological toll of the job. But she couldn't outlast the department's unwritten age policies. Not bad for an old-timer, came a voice behind her. Grace turned to see Officer Jake Eagle Eye Reynolds, 27 years old and cocky enough to believe his own nickname. His tactical uniform was pressed to perfection, his brown hair regulation short. Everything about him screamed rising star except his eyes, which held the hollow look Grace recognized in officers who'd seen too much too young. Thanks for the encouragement, hotshot, Grace replied, slinging the rifle case over her shoulder. Shouldn't you be practicing your basic marksmanship? I heard you missed twice during your last qualification. Reynolds' cheeks reddened. That was a firearm malfunction. Sure it was. Grace brushed past him toward the administration building where Commander Bennett waited. The observation deck had emptied except for Bennett and a woman Grace didn't recognize, tall, sharp-featured, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide her law enforcement bearing. Bennett descended the stairs, his polished boots clicking against metal steps. Sergeant Mitchell. Impressive shooting as always. Thank you, sir. Grace kept her voice neutral, though she could hear the dismissal coming. Bennett had been angling to reject her sniper program application for months, citing the need for officers with peak physical condition in the unit. I've reviewed your preliminary scores, Bennett continued. Top marks across the board. Your experience is valuable to the department. Grace waited for the but. There was always a but. But, Bennett said, his smile patronizing, the sniper unit requires officers who can deploy rapidly in high-stress situations. The physical demands alone. He gestured vaguely at Grace's silver-streaked hair. Well, you understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Heat flared in Grace's chest. 23 years of service, hundreds of arrests, and more successful operations than Bennett would accumulate in his entire career, reduced to gray hair and perceived physical limitations. I understand perfectly, sir, Grace said through clenched teeth. The civilian woman stepped forward, extending her hand. Sergeant Mitchell. I'm Director Sarah Reeves, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I wonder if we could speak privately. Bennett frowned. Director Reeves, as I explained, Sergeant Mitchell is being transitioned to administrative duties. Any operational discussion should go through proper channels. This is proper channels, Commander. Reeves' voice carried quiet authority. Sergeant, if you would. Grace glanced between them, then nodded. Bennett's frown deepened, but he stepped back. Reeves led Grace toward a small conference room adjacent to the administrative area. Coffee? Reeves asked, closing the door behind them. I prefer answers, Grace replied. Reeves smiled, the first genuine expression Grace had seen all day. Fair enough. How much do you know about the Davidson case? Enough. Grace shrugged. Serial sniper, 5 victims across 3 states. No forensic evidence, long-range shots, military precision. The investigation's been ongoing for 8 months. 11 months now. And we just confirmed a 6th victim in Colorado. Reeves pulled out a tablet showing crime scene photos that made Grace's blood run cold. All expert shots, Grace observed, studying the images. Over 1,000 yards each time. The shooter knows what they're doing. Exactly. Which is why I'm here. Reeves leaned forward. Grace, may I call you Grace? What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Grace nodded, her administrative reassignment forgotten. Davidson isn't just a serial killer. He's a former military sniper, special forces, with specialized training in long-distance marksmanship. We believe he's selecting targets that represent authority figures, judges, prosecutors, a police captain. And you think I can help find him? Grace asked, though she suspected the answer. Reeves smiled again. I think you might be the only one who can. Your background in behavioral analysis combined with your shooting skills makes you uniquely qualified to understand how he thinks, how he selects his positions, how he plans his shots. Grace's breath caught. This was the kind of case that defined careers, that saved lives, that made a difference beyond routine patrols and paperwork. Why me? Grace asked, though she already knew the answer. Because you see angles others don't. Because you understand precision shooting from both a technical and psychological perspective. And because your record shows you've never missed a qualifying shot in 23 years of service. Grace considered this. At 48, she'd already lived longer than many in law enforcement hoped to. Her son was grown, her ex-husband had remarried, and her career was ending whether she liked it or not. What's the catch? She asked. There was always a catch. The catch is that the operation is dangerous, off books, and requires someone who can think like Davidson. Someone who understands that the perfect shot isn't just about distance, it's about patience, preparation, and psychological control. You want me to profile him. I want you to become him. To understand him so completely that you can anticipate his next move before he makes it. Grace stood and walked to the small window overlooking the shooting range. Through the reinforced glass, she could see younger officers practicing with standard-issue handguns, their movements quick but imprecise. She'd been like them once, relying on speed and aggression rather than calculation and control. There's something else, Reeves said quietly. Commander Bennett has already recommended Officer Reynolds for our task force. His youth, his reflexes, his natural talent. Grace turned sharply. Reynolds? He's barely qualified on standard firearms, let alone precision long-distance shooting. I know, but Bennett believes younger officers adapt better to high-pressure situations. Less physical limitations. Less experience to keep them alive when things go wrong, you mean? That's my assessment as well, which is why I'm here offering you the position directly. Grace felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Take the assignment, and she'd be walking into the mind of a killer, risking her safety and sanity to stop a sniper who'd already proven himself deadlier than most. Decline, and she'd retire quietly to a desk while Reynolds fumbled his way through an investigation that would likely cost more lives. "When would I start?" she asked. "Tonight. We've established a command post in Denver. You'd have 3 days to review the case files before field operations begin. 3 days to absorb everything about a killer who'd eluded federal agents for nearly a year. 3 days to prepare for an operation that would require her to outthink a trained military sniper. The psychological and physical demands would be extreme, but they'd be playing to her strengths, patience, analytical thinking, and precision under pressure." "What about Bennett?" "He'll be told you've been selected for a special assignment. He'll assume it's some kind of interagency advisory role, helping younger officers transition to tactical operations. By the time he realizes what's happening, you'll be in Colorado." Grace looked out at the range again. Tomorrow, other officers would be shooting there. Younger officers with quicker reflexes and less experience. Reynolds would probably take her training slot, her assignments. He'd do fine for a while, but he couldn't do this. "I accept," Grace said. The flight to Denver took 3 hours. Grace strapped into a window seat aboard an FBI transport plane. The seat next to her occupied by case files she wasn't supposed to be reviewing yet. The flight attendant, an FBI agent with 15 years of service, kept glancing at her with curiosity. Female sergeants were common enough, but middle-aged female sergeants traveling to join a high-priority federal task force were apparently worth staring at. Grace tried to focus, but her mind kept racing. The briefing had been deliberately vague. Profile the killer. Anticipate his movements. Help prevent the next shooting. Simple objectives that concealed staggering complexity. Modern serial killers were sophisticated, methodical, and increasingly aware of law enforcement techniques. Understanding one would require her to access the darkest parts of human psychology. The plane's engines changed pitch, beginning their descent toward Denver International Airport. Grace felt her ears pop as the transport dropped altitude, leaving the comfort of high-altitude cruise for the turbulent air closer to the Rocky Mountains. Through the window, she could see the sprawling city of Denver spread below, surrounded by mountains where a killer could be waiting, selecting his next target through a precision scope, calculating wind and distance with mathematical perfection. 10 minutes, the agent called. Grace checked her equipment for the 3rd time. Credentials, sidearm, personal items, everything she'd need for an assignment that would push her skills to their limits. After 23 years of service, her most important case would also be her most challenging. The plane touched down with barely a bump, a testament to the pilot's skill. Grace had seen young pilots slam aircraft into runways like they were trying to crack the concrete. Experience mattered no matter what Commander Bennett believed. As the cabin door opened, Grace saw Director Reeves waiting beside a black SUV, her civilian clothes replaced by a tactical outfit bearing FBI insignia. She looked like what Grace suspected. She was a field agent with extensive experience in high-risk operations. "How was the flight?" Reeves asked as Grace descended the stairs. "Uncomfortable and informative." "Where's the command post?" "Follow me." The SUV drove past the main terminal, where travelers moved with the blissful ignorance of those unaware of the danger that might be targeting the city. Reeves turned onto a restricted access road that curved through the outskirts of the city, climbing steadily until it reached a checkpoint manned by FBI tactical personnel in full gear. "IDs," demanded the senior agent on duty. Reeves showed credentials that made the guard's eyes widen. He waved them through without examining Grace's identification, which was probably for the best. Her hasty secondment to the FBI task force hadn't come with updated credentials. The road continued for another mile before emerging into a secluded area surrounded by security fencing. Grace's breath caught. Below them stretched a facility that screamed federal operation, a compound of prefabricated buildings, satellite communications equipment, and enough tactical vehicles to suggest a major operation was underway. "Welcome to Operation Longshot," Reeves said. Population 32, all with higher security clearances than most directors. The SUV descended toward the largest structure, a building so nondescript it could have housed anything from office workers to a classified research operation. The Davidson case officially became a national security concern 3 months ago, Reeves explained as they parked. Foreign intelligence connections, potential terrorist links, threats to critical infrastructure. Congress released emergency funding, and we built this. Grace felt increasingly like she'd stepped into a different world. Her normal life of patrol schedules, department politics, and community policing seemed increasingly distant. They entered the command center through a side door that required Reeves to submit to both retinal scanning and credential verification. Grace waited, feeling increasingly like this operation was far beyond what she'd expected. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss. Grace stepped inside and forgot to breathe. The command center buzzed with activity, dozens of agents and analysts working at computer stations that displayed maps, timelines, and data visualizations. Large screens showed surveillance footage, ballistic analyses, and what appeared to be real-time satellite imagery of urban areas. It looked like the kind of operation Grace had only seen in movies, the full might of federal law enforcement focused on a single target. "Sweet Mother of God," Grace whispered. "Impressive, isn't it?" Reeves approached his central workstation with obvious pride. Behavioral analysis, ballistics, tactical planning, intelligence gathering, all in one place. "We've been building this for 3 months, preparing for the moment when Davidson makes his next move." A man emerged from behind a row of monitors, wiping his glasses on his shirt. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered look of a career agent. His tactical vest bore no name tag, but Grace recognized the type senior agents who'd seen it all and developed the kind of instincts that couldn't be taught. "Sergeant Mitchell," he extended a hand. "Special Agent Tom Rodriguez, lead profiler. Been waiting to meet you." "Pleasure. Tell me about Davidson." Rodriguez grinned. "Where do I start? Former Special Forces, sniper training with 3 tours in combat zones. Discharged 5 years ago under circumstances that remain classified. Disappeared for 2 years, then surfaced with his first kill in Portland, a federal judge who'd ruled against veteran benefits in a class action suit." Grace walked around the command center, her trained eye cataloging details. The ballistics data showed remarkable consistency in the shots, all taken from elevated positions, all between 1,000 and 1,200 yards, all with minimal wind interference. Most interesting was the psychological profile displayed on one of the screens. Methodical, patient, mission-oriented, with a rigid sense of justice that had become dangerously warped. "His pattern?" she asked. 6-week cooling-off period between kills. Target selection that suggests a perceived betrayal of authority: judges, police brass, prosecutors. Each victim had made decisions that adversely affected military personnel or veterans. Davidson sees himself as an avenger. Grace nodded, trying to process everything. The profile was consistent with what she'd seen in other mission-oriented killers, a distorted moral code that justified murder as a form of justice. "What makes you think he's in Denver?" she asked. Reeves gestured to a tactical display showing patterns of veteran service organizations, shooting ranges, and potential target locations throughout the city. "Intelligence suggests he's selecting his next target from a pool of 3 possibilities: a district attorney who declined to prosecute a case of fraud against veterans, a police commander who fired a veteran officer for procedural violations, and a federal administrator who denied a major veterans' healthcare initiative." Grace studied the map. Each potential target created a web of possible shooting positions, observation points, and escape routes. Davidson would select his position based on multiple factors: line of sight, distance, cover from counter snipers, and clean escape options. "Your role," Reeves said, "is to help us narrow down where he'll set up. We have surveillance on the targets, but the shooting positions number in the hundreds. We need someone who thinks like a sniper to tell us where to look. When do I start? Grace asked. Rodriguez checked his watch. Briefing in 30 minutes. Then you'll be paired with our tactical team to begin field assessments of potential shooting locations. Grace looked around at the high-tech equipment, the dedicated personnel, and the obvious resources being poured into catching one man. The scope of the operation was both impressive and terrifying, a reminder of how dangerous Davidson truly was. One more thing, Reeves said quietly. You should know that not everyone on the task force supported bringing you in. Some of the tactical team members share Commander Bennett's views about experience versus youth. Grace understood immediately. She would be fighting 2 battles, one against a killer who'd evaded capture for nearly a year, and another against colleagues who doubted her abilities based on nothing more than her age. Let them doubt, Grace said. I'll change their minds when we catch Davidson. Reeves smiled. That's exactly why you're here. 30 minutes later, Grace stood in the briefing room, surrounded by FBI agents, tactical team members, and analysts who represented the elite of federal law enforcement. Their expressions ranged from professional curiosity to barely disguised skepticism. She was clearly the outsider, the local cop brought in for reasons many of them didn't understand or support. The briefing officer, Special Agent Marcus Chun, outlined the current state of the investigation with military precision. Davidson's pattern suggested he was in the final stages of preparation for his next kill. Surveillance had identified unusual activity near 2 of the 3 potential targets. Tactical teams were positioned for rapid response, but the critical question remained: where exactly would Davidson set up his shooting position? Sergeant Mitchell, Chun said finally, Director Reeves suggests you have insight into how Davidson selects his firing positions. The floor is yours. Grace stepped forward, feeling all eyes on her. This was the moment to establish credibility or confirm their doubts. She accessed the digital display and pulled up the ballistics data from the previous 6 shootings. Davidson isn't just a shooter, she began. He's an artist. These aren't opportunistic kills. They're carefully choreographed performances designed to demonstrate skill and control. She highlighted the distance markers from each shooting. Notice the consistent range between 1,000 and 1,200 yards. That's not coincidence. It's his signature. He wants the shot to be difficult, but not impossible. He needs to prove his mastery. Grace moved to the map of Denver. Based on the previous patterns, he'll select a position with 3 key characteristics: elevation advantage, multiple escape routes, and symbolic significance. Symbolic significance? Asked one of the younger agents, his tone skeptical. Davidson isn't just killing. He's making a statement. In Portland, he positioned himself on top of the Veterans Memorial Building. In Atlanta, it was an abandoned military recruitment center. He chooses locations that reinforce his self-image as an avenger for veterans. Grace zoomed in on the map, highlighting several buildings near the district attorney's office. If the DA is the target, Davidson will set up here. She pointed to a construction site 17 blocks away. Perfect elevation, undersecured, and it used to be the site of a VFW hall before it was demolished for luxury condos. The room fell silent as the agents processed her analysis. Chun looked impressed despite himself. And the other potential targets? Grace moved methodically through each scenario, identifying the most likely shooting positions based on Davidson's established patterns. With each assessment, she could feel the skepticism in the room giving way to grudging respect. She wasn't just guessing, she was demonstrating a level of insight that came from decades of studying human behavior and understanding the psychology of precision shooting. Questions? She asked when she finished. A tactical team leader raised his hand. With all due respect, Sergeant, how confident are you in these assessments? We're talking about allocating limited resources based on your theories. Grace met his eyes directly. Confident enough to put myself in the most likely location. If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing but time. If I'm right, we catch a killer before he takes another life. The tactical leader looked taken aback, but nodded with new respect. Teams deploy in 3 hours, Sean announced. Sergeant Mitchell will accompany Tactical Team Alpha to the construction site near the DA's office. Director Reeves has final authority on operational decisions. As the briefing broke up, Reeves approached Grace. That was impressive. You've just earned yourself some breathing room with the skeptics. It won't matter unless I'm right, Grace replied. Are you? Reeves asked. Right, I mean. Grace looked at the map again, at the pattern she'd identified, at the psychological profile that had begun to form in her mind. Yes, she said simply. He'll be at the construction site. Tomorrow or the next day, when the DA walks to his car after work. From the 17th floor, with a northwest-facing window. The shot will be 1,127 yards, with minimal wind interference from that direction. Reeves studied her face. You sound like you're inside his head already. I am, Grace said. That's what scares me. Grace spent the next 3 hours in the equipment room, preparing for field deployment. Unlike the sterile familiarity of her police department's gear, the FBI's tactical equipment was specialized for high-risk surveillance operations. Night vision monoculars, thermal imaging devices, and communication systems that could operate in complete radio silence. She selected what she needed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades learning what worked in the field. You know your way around tactical gear, observed Special Agent Lisa Dunham, the tactical team leader who'd be accompanying Grace to the construction site. Her tone carried grudging respect beneath professional neutrality. 23 years teaches you what you really need versus what just looks impressive, Grace replied, selecting a lightweight tactical vest and communications headset. Dunham nodded, her earlier skepticism softening slightly. Most consultants show up over-equipped and under-preppered. Not most consultants. They packed their equipment into unmarked backpacks designed to look like ordinary work gear. Their cover would be simple building inspectors conducting routine assessments. It wasn't bulletproof, but it would provide enough explanation to avoid immediate suspicion. As Grace completed her preparations, Director Reeves approached with a tactical briefing package. Final intelligence update on Davidson. Facial recognition software caught him on a security camera 3 blocks from the construction site yesterday. It's a 73% match, not conclusive, but significant. Grace studied the grainy image. The man was average height, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, with nothing remarkable about his appearance, precisely the kind of forgettable presence that successful predators cultivated. What's your assessment? Reeves asked. He's already conducted at least 2 reconnaissance visits to the site. He's planning to shoot within the next 48 hours. Grace pointed to details in the image that others might have missed. The slight bulge of a rangefinder in his jacket pocket, the deliberate way he scanned his surroundings, the military bearing that training couldn't completely conceal. Reeves raised an eyebrow. That's a lot to infer from one grainy photo. It's not inference. It's experience. Davidson is following a protocol he's used 6 times before. The only question is whether we can get ahead of his timeline. The transportation to the site was deliberately low profile, a utility company van that would attract no attention in the downtown construction zone. Grace sat in the back with Dunham and 2 other agents, reviewing blueprints of the building where they believed Davidson would set up his shooting position. 17th floor, northwest corner, Grace indicated. It's the sweet spot, perfect angle on the DA's parking space, minimal wind interference from surrounding buildings, and enough construction material to provide cover while he sets up. Dunham studied the blueprints. That's a lot of floors to clear without being noticed. He won't be noticed because he's already there, Grace said. He secured his position days ago. Probably posed as a contractor or inspector, just like we're doing now. You think he's been living in the construction site? One of the younger agents asked, his tone skeptical. I think he's established a hide. Special Forces snipers can remain in position for days with minimal supplies. Davidson wouldn't risk multiple entries and exits that might draw attention. The agents exchanged glances, reassessing the operation in light of Grace's analysis. They'd been thinking like law enforcement officers planning to intercept a criminal. Grace was thinking like a sniper planning to remain undetected until the perfect moment. The van pulled into the construction zone, passing through a security checkpoint with barely a glance at their forged credentials. Grace noted the lax security with a professional grimace, exactly the kind of environment Davidson would exploit. Split into teams of 2, Dunham instructed. Jimenez and Taylor take floors 1 through 10. Mitchell and I will start at the top and work down. Standard sweep protocols. Maintain calm silence unless you find something. If you encounter Davidson, do not engage without backup. Grace and Dunham took the service elevator to the 20th floor, the highest level with completed structural work. The building was a skeleton of concrete and steel, with temporary lighting casting harsh shadows across unfinished spaces. Perfect hunting ground for a patient predator. They moved methodically through each floor, checking hiding spots, examining dust patterns for signs of recent disturbance, and maintaining a careful awareness of sight lines to the district attorney's office building 17 blocks away. On the 17th floor, Grace immediately noticed what the others would have missed: subtle displacement of construction, materials creating a natural blind that offered both concealment and a clear view of the target area. She held up a hand, signaling Dunham to stop. Without speaking, she pointed to the floor near one of the window openings where the dust pattern showed the faint impression of someone having knelt for an extended period. Dunham's eyes widened in recognition. She keyed her radio, sending a single click that would alert the team without verbal communication. Grace moved closer to the window, careful not to disturb any evidence. From this position, she had a perfect view of the district attorney's parking space. She pulled out a rangefinder and confirmed what she already suspected: 1,127 yards exactly. The distance Davidson preferred for his signature shots. He's been here, she whispered. Recently. Dunham nodded, carefully examining the surrounding area for additional evidence. In the corner, partially concealed behind a stack of drywall, she found a discarded coffee cup with dried residue at the bottom. Recent, she confirmed. Within the last 24 hours. Grace felt a chill of recognition. She was right about the location, but the timeline was accelerating. Davidson wasn't planning for tomorrow or the next day, he was planning for today. We need to sweep the rest of this floor immediately, she said. He's established his primary position, but he'll have a secondary and possibly a tertiary position as well. Standard sniper protocol. They moved with increased urgency, checking every possible firing position with the northwest exposure. On the opposite side of the floor, Grace found what she was looking for: a backup position that offered a slightly different angle on the target area, with separate access to the emergency stairwell. He's planning for today, Grace said with certainty. The DA's schedule shows him leaving the office at 5:30 p.m. That gives us less than 2 hours. Dunham radioed the command center, relaying their findings and requesting additional tactical support. Within minutes, the operation transformed from investigation to active threat response. The district attorney would be discreetly secured and removed from the building through an underground parking garage. Tactical teams would establish a perimeter around the construction site, and counter-sniper units would deploy to neutralize Davidson if he appeared. Grace and Dunham remained on the 17th floor, converting the surveillance operation into an ambush. If Davidson returned to his primary position, they would be waiting. You called it, Dunham admitted as they established their concealed positions. right down to the exact floor and window. Grace didn't reply immediately. She was mentally reviewing everything she knew about Davidson, trying to anticipate his next move. Something felt wrong. Davidson was too experienced, too methodical to be so predictable. "He's not coming back here," she said suddenly. "What? You just said this was his position." "It is, or it was. But we've been here too long, disturbed too much. He'll sense it. How could he possibly know we've been here? We've been careful." Grace pointed to the subtle changes in the environment that only another trained observer would notice. The slightly different position of the coffee cup, the altered dust patterns, the minute shifts in the construction materials they'd had to move during their search. Davidson isn't just a sniper. He's a hunter. He'll detect our presence the moment he approaches the floor. Dunham frowned, reassessing the operation. If he's not coming here, where is he going? Grace moved to the window, studying the target building and the surrounding area with fresh eyes. If she were Davidson and her primary position had been compromised, where would she go? The answer came with sudden clarity. "The Adams Building," she said, pointing to a newly renovated office tower diagonal to the district attorney's building. "It's further away, probably 1,400 yards, but it offers an elevated position, clear line of sight, and multiple escape routes. Most importantly, it wouldn't be on our radar because it exceeds Davidson's usual range. 1,400 yards is an extremely difficult shot, even for a skilled marksman." Dunham objected. "That's exactly why he'll choose it. He's not just killing, he's proving himself. Exceeding his previous limitations would be irresistible, especially if he suspects we're onto him." Dunham looked unconvinced but radioed the command center with Grace's assessment. The response was immediate and predictable. They didn't have enough personnel to cover both locations with equal force. They would maintain the primary team at the construction site, while sending a smaller contingent to check the Adams Building. "Let me go," Grace said. "I know what to look for." "Alone?" "That's against protocol." "Then send one person with me. But we need to move now. If I'm right, Davidson is already setting up at the secondary location." After a brief radio consultation, Dunham made her decision. "I'll go with you. Taylor and Jimenez can maintain position here." They moved quickly, taking the service elevator down and crossing to the Adams Building through a network of alleyways that kept them out of potential sight lines. The Adams Building was more challenging to access, a functional office tower with actual security rather than an open construction site. Their FBI credentials got them through the lobby, but the upper floors would require more finesse. Grace studied the building directory and made a quick assessment. "The mechanical floor," she said. 26th level. It would give him roof access without regular foot traffic. They took the elevator to the 25th floor, then used the service stairs to access the restricted mechanical level. The door was secured with an electronic keypad, a significant obstacle for ordinary intruders but a minor inconvenience for someone with Davidson's training. Sure enough, the lock showed subtle signs of tampering. Someone had bypassed it recently, leaving microscopic scratch marks on the keypad housing. Dunham drew her weapon, and Grace followed suit. They entered the mechanical floor with tactical precision, moving silently through the labyrinth of HVAC equipment and electrical panels. The space was dim, illuminated only by emergency lighting and the glow of equipment status indicators. Grace felt it immediately, the subtle change in air current that indicated access to the roof had been opened. She signaled to Dunham, pointing toward the far corner where a maintenance ladder led to a roof hatch. They approached with extreme caution, clearing each section of the floor before advancing. Near the ladder, Grace found confirmation of her theory, a small piece of nylon cord, the kind used in high-end tactical gear, recently cut and discarded. The roof hatch was slightly ajar, letting in a sliver of late afternoon sunlight. Dunham radioed their position and findings to the command center, requesting immediate backup and air support. The response was immediate. Teams were being redirected to the Adams building, but they were at least 10 minutes out. "We can't wait," Grace whispered. "The DI is scheduled to leave any minute. If Davidson has established his position, he'll take the shot as soon as the target appears." Dunham nodded grimly. "Standard approach?" "No, he'll be expecting that. I'll go first, from the northeast corner. You circle around from the south. He'll be positioned on the western edge with line of sight to the DA's building." They synchronized their watches and moved into position. Grace ascended the ladder with silent efficiency, years of tactical training overriding the protests of joints that weren't as young as they once were. She eased the hatch open, just enough to survey the roof landscape. The roof was expansive, dotted with ventilation units, satellite dishes, and mechanical housings, a perfect environment for a sniper to establish a concealed position. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the surface, providing additional cover for anyone wanting to remain hidden. Grace slipped onto the roof, staying low and using the mechanical structures for cover. She moved methodically toward the western edge, scanning for any sign of Davidson. The wind was stronger at this height, carrying the distant sounds of city traffic and occasionally whipping her clothing against her body. That's when she saw him, a shadow among shadows, positioned behind a large ventilation unit with a clear line of sight to the district attorney's building. His rifle was already deployed on a bipod, the barrel extending just far enough past the unit to provide an unobstructed shot. Grace assessed the situation instantly. Davidson was completely focused on his target, his eye pressed to the scope, his breathing controlled and rhythmic. He hadn't detected her presence yet, but any direct approach would alert him immediately. She caught a glimpse of Dunham on the southern edge of the roof, also having spotted Davidson. They exchanged silent signals. They needed to act now before the D appeared in Davidson's scope. Grace made her decision. She would use Davidson's intense focus against him, approaching from his blind side while he remained fixated on his target. It was risky. If he detected her movement, he could swivel the rifle in her direction faster than she could react. But the alternative was allowing him to take the shot. She moved with the patience of a hunter stalking prey, placing each foot with deliberate care to minimize sound. 15 yards from Davidson's position, her tactical training took over. She became aware of everything simultaneously: the direction of the wind, the position of the sun, the minute shifts in Davidson's posture as he made final adjustments to his aim. 10 yards. Davidson remained focused on his scope, unaware of her approach. In his mind, he was alone on the roof, moments away from completing his mission. The single-minded focus that made him deadly also made him vulnerable. 5 yards. Grace could now see the details of his equipment: a customized long-range tactical rifle with a suppressor, a wind gauge attached to the side of his position, a rangefinder within easy reach. Everything a professional would need for a shot that most would consider impossible. 3 yards. She could hear his controlled breathing now, the methodical rhythm of inhale, hold, exhale that marked a trained marksman preparing for a crucial shot. "Federal agent," Grace announced clearly, her weapon trained on Davidson's head. "Move away from the rifle, hands where I can see them." Time seemed to suspend. For a fraction of a second, Davidson remained perfectly still, as if calculating his options. Then, with explosive speed, he rolled away from the rifle, drawing a sidearm from a concealed holster. Grace had anticipated this exact movement. Her first shot struck his hand, sending the pistol clattering across the roof surface. Her second shot would have neutralized the threat permanently, but she hesitated, seeing something in Davidson's eyes that gave her pause. That split-second hesitation nearly cost her everything. Davidson launched himself toward her with military precision, his injured hand seemingly forgotten as he closed the distance between them. Grace fired again, but the round went wide as Davidson collided with her, sending them both to the roof surface in a tangle of limbs. He was stronger, younger, trained in hand-to-hand combat by the most elite military units in the world. But Grace had something he didn't: decades of real-world experience, restraining suspects who were often larger and more aggressive than her. She used his momentum against him, allowing his weight to carry them into a roll that ended with her knee pressed against his injured hand and her weapon against his temple. "It's over, Davidson," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You've taken your last shot." Davidson's eyes burned with a mixture of hatred and something else: respect, perhaps for the opponent who had outmaneuvered him. "You don't understand what I'm doing," he growled. "They betrayed us. All of them. Someone has to hold them accountable." "That's not your job," Grace replied. "And this isn't justice, it's murder." Dunham appeared at Grace's side, weapon trained on Davidson as she secured his injured hand with tactical restraints. "Target secure," she reported into her radio. "Suspect in custody, officer holding. Request immediate extraction and medical support." As the adrenaline began to fade, Grace became aware of the pain in her side where Davidson's elbow had connected during their struggle. She would have impressive bruises tomorrow, but she'd survived much worse. "How did you know?" Davidson asked suddenly, his voice quieter now. "How did you know I'd change positions?" Grace met his gaze directly. "Because I understood what you needed. Not just to eliminate your target, but to prove your mastery. The construction site was too easy, too predictable. This," she gestured toward the rifle still positioned at the edge of the roof, "this was the real challenge." Davidson's expression shifted, the mask of hatred giving way to a flicker of vulnerability. Nobody else figured that out. 6 operations, and they were always a step behind. "They were looking for a killer," Grace said. "I was looking for a sniper." The roof access door burst open as tactical teams swarmed the area, securing Davidson and establishing a perimeter. Director Reeves emerged from the stairwell, surveying the scene with obvious relief. "The district attorney is secure," she reported. "Never even left the building." "Excellent work, Sergeant Mitchell." Grace nodded, the professional acknowledgement meaning more than any effusive praise. She had done what younger, supposedly more capable agents couldn't: understood the mind of a predator so completely that she could anticipate his moves before he made them. As the tactical team led Davidson away, Dunham approached Grace with newfound respect in her eyes. "That was impressive field work. Most people would have taken the shot. Most people wouldn't have understood what he really wanted," Grace replied. "Davidson wasn't just killing targets. He was proving himself against increasingly difficult challenges. The ultimate shot was always going to be his undoing. He couldn't resist pushing beyond his established pattern." Reeves joined them, observing the rifle setup with professional interest. 1,423 yards, according to our initial measurement. Would he have made the shot? Grace studied the position, the angle, the equipment Davidson had assembled. Yes, he would have. And that's exactly why we had to stop him, because each success would have pushed him to attempt something even more ambitious next time. As they descended from the roof, Grace felt the weight of the past 3 days settling on her shoulders. She had immersed herself in the mind of a killer, understood his motivations and methods so completely that she could predict his actions. It was exhausting, disturbing work, but it had saved lives. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached the tactical command vehicle established in the building's underground parking. Reeves smiled. "Now? Now you become the most sought-after consultant in the federal law enforcement community. Your insights just closed a case that had stymied multiple agencies for almost a year." Grace shook her head. "I'm just a sergeant who was about to be pushed into retirement." "Not anymore," Reeves replied. "Unless that's still what you want." 3 days later, Grace sat in Director Reeves' temporary office at the Denver field office, reviewing the after-action reports from Davidson's capture. The walls were covered with case materials being methodically archived, photographs of crime scenes, ballistics reports, psychological profiles, and maps showing Davidson's movements across 3 states. The case that had consumed federal resources for nearly a year was finally closed. The prosecutor says Davidson is willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for life without parole instead of the death penalty, Reeves said, sliding a file across the desk. His military record and psychological evaluation give him enough leverage to avoid execution. Grace nodded, unsurprised. He never intended to survive this long. Each mission was supposed to be his last, a perfect shot, a clean escape, then retirement. But he couldn't stop pushing the boundaries. That's consistent with his confession. He described it as chasing the perfect shot. Each success left him empty, needing a greater challenge. Reeves studied Grace with curious respect. How did you know that about him before we even caught him? Grace considered the question, organizing her thoughts before answering. Because the obsession isn't about killing, it's about mastery. The same drive that makes expert marksmen keep practicing long after they've achieved excellence. The need to prove you can do what others can't. You sound like you understand it personally. I do. Grace met Reeves' gaze directly. I've spent 23 years mastering skills that most people in my department considered unnecessary for someone like me. I know what it means to be driven by the need to prove yourself. Reeves nodded, acknowledging the parallel without drawing too fine a point on it. Which brings me to why I asked you here. The Bureau is establishing a new behavioral analysis unit, specifically focused on mission-oriented offenders, terrorists, ideologically motivated killers, and tactical criminals like Davidson. Grace raised an eyebrow. And you want my input? I want your leadership, Reeves replied. As the unit chief. The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected and momentous. Grace had come to Denver expecting to assist with a single case before returning to the administrative retirement Bennett had planned for her. Now she was being offered the chance to build something new, something that would leverage her unique insights and experience. I'm a local police sergeant, not an FBI agent, Grace objected. Bureau regulations can be navigated, Reeves interrupted. We're establishing this as a joint task force with direct recruitment authority. Your department would technically loan you to us, but you'd have operational control of the unit. Grace considered the implications. Leading a specialized federal unit would mean leaving behind the department that had been her professional home for over 2 decades. It would mean relocating, building new relationships, and proving herself all over again in an environment where her age might still be viewed as a liability rather than an asset. But it would also mean the chance to apply everything she'd learned throughout her career to cases where that knowledge could save lives. I'd need to select my own team, Grace said, her mind already organizing the structure such a unit would require. Absolutely. Full recruiting authority within budget constraints. And I'd want to establish a training program for law enforcement agencies nationwide. If we're going to get ahead of offenders like Davidson, we need to build capacity at the local level. Reeves smiled. That's exactly why you're perfect for this. You're thinking beyond the immediate case to the broader systemic challenges. Grace fell silent, weighing the opportunity against what she would be leaving behind. Her son was grown and established in his own career 3 states away. Her ex-husband had remarried and built a new life. Her closest friends in the department were either retired or close to it. The roots holding her in place were fewer than she'd realized. Commander Bennett would be thrilled to see me go, she said finally. I suspect he would be, Reeves agreed. But consider this, your departure wouldn't be the professional exile he intended. It would be a promotion to a position that recognizes exactly what he failed to value. The satisfaction in that realization was undeniable. Bennett had tried to sideline her based on outdated assumptions about age and capability. Instead, He would be losing one of his most valuable assets to a federal task force created specifically to leverage her expertise. When would this start? Grace asked. 2 weeks from today. We've secured temporary headquarters in Quantico while permanent facilities are prepared. Your first task would be assembling your core team and establishing operational protocols. Grace nodded slowly, the decision crystallizing in her mind. I'll need to return to my department to properly hand off my current responsibilities. Of course. A bureau jet can take you back tomorrow morning. You'd have 10 days to arrange the transition before reporting to Quantico. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, housing arrangements, security clearances, administrative requirements. With each detail, the abstract opportunity became increasingly concrete, a new professional chapter taking shape before her. As their meeting concluded, Reeves walked Grace to the elevator. One more thing, she said. Agent Dunham has requested assignment to your new unit. She was quite impressed with your fieldwork. Grace smiled, remembering the skeptical tactical leader who had gradually shifted from doubt to respect over the course of the operation. I'd be happy to have her. Converts make the most dedicated disciples. I thought you might say that. Her transfer paperwork is already being processed. The elevator arrived, and Grace stepped inside, feeling the momentous weight of transformation. 3 days ago, she had been fighting against forced retirement. Now she was preparing to lead a specialized federal unit that would shape how law enforcement approached some of the most dangerous offenders in the country. Grace, Reeves called as the doors began to close. For what it's worth, I think Commander Bennett did you a favor. If he hadn't tried to push you out, you might never have come to our attention. I'll be sure to thank him, Grace replied with a wry smile as the doors closed. The flight back to her home department the next morning gave Grace time to organize her thoughts. She reviewed the preliminary documentation for the new behavioral analysis unit, making notes about organizational structure, training requirements, and case selection criteria. The Bureau was given her unprecedented latitude to build the unit from the ground up, a recognition that traditional approaches had failed to address the growing threat of mission-oriented offenders. As the plane descended toward her home airport, Grace felt a curious mixture of emotions. She was leaving behind a department that had shaped her entire adult life, colleagues who had become family, and a community she had sworn to protect. But she was also embracing an opportunity to multiply her impact, to build something that would save lives across the country. Commander Bennett was waiting in his office when Grace arrived at the department. His expression was guarded, clearly uncertain why she had returned from Denver with FBI credentials rather than her standard department identification. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, sir." Grace kept her tone professional, despite the satisfaction she felt at his obvious discomfort. "I wanted to brief you personally on the transition plan for my responsibilities." Bennett nodded stiffly. "The FBI has already submitted the formal request for your extended assignment. Quite irregular, but apparently they were quite impressed with your contribution to the Davidson case." "It was a team effort," Grace replied diplomatically, though they both knew her role had been pivotal in bringing the killer to justice. "Of course." Bennett shuffled papers on his desk, clearly uncomfortable with the reversal of fortunes. "I assume you'll need time to properly hand off your current projects. 10 days should be sufficient. I've prepared a detailed transition plan." She placed a folder on his desk, the contents meticulously organized to ensure her departure wouldn't disrupt departmental operations. Bennett glanced at the folder but didn't open it. "And Officer Reynolds? I understand he was being considered for the FBI task force as well." Grace suppressed a smile at the transparent attempt to salvage something from the situation. "Officer Reynolds has significant potential, but the Bureau felt he needed more field experience before assignment to a specialized unit." The diplomatic phrasing couldn't entirely hide the reality. Reynolds had been evaluated and found wanting compared to the experienced officers being recruited for the new unit. Bennett's golden boy would remain under his command rather than advancing to federal service. "I see." Bennett's expression tightened. "Well, I'm sure he'll have other opportunities." "I'm sure he will." Grace paused, considering her next words carefully. "Commander, I'd like to recommend that you consider creating a mentoring program pairing experienced officers with promising recruits. The Davidson case demonstrated the value of combining youth and experience rather than treating them as mutually exclusive assets. It was as close as she would come to directly addressing the ageism that had nearly ended her career. Bennett understood the subtext immediately, his expression shifting from discomfort to grudging recognition. "I'll take that under advisement, Sergeant." He cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, your performance in Denver was impressive. The department is proud of your contribution." The belated acknowledgement was both gratifying and irrelevant. 3 weeks ago, his approval would have meant everything. Now it was simply a professional courtesy between colleagues about to part ways. "Thank you, sir." It was an honor to represent the department. They concluded the meeting with the formal details of her reassignment administrative requirements, benefits considerations, and the possibility of eventually returning to the department if the federal assignment ended. Both knew that was unlikely. Grace's career had found a new trajectory that would carry her far beyond the limitations Bennett had tried to impose. As Grace left his office, she passed the bullpen where younger officers were gathering for shift briefing. Reynolds stood among them, his expression darkening slightly as he recognized her. The news of her federal appointment had clearly spread throughout the department. "Sergeant Mitchell," he called, breaking away from the group. "A moment?" Grace paused, curious about what the young officer might have to say. His earlier cockiness had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of respect and residual resentment. "I heard about the FBI position," Reynolds said, his voice lowered to avoid being overheard. "Congratulations." "Thank you, Officer Reynolds." He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his next words. "They told me I wasn't selected because I lacked experience, that I needed more time in the field before I'd be considered." Grace studied him, seeing beyond the wounded pride to the potential beneath. Reynolds was talented but raw, convinced of his natural abilities without understanding how much he still had to learn. "Experience isn't just about time served, Reynolds. It's about what you learn from each day on the job, how you integrate those lessons into your approach." She paused, offering what Bennett never had: constructive guidance rather than dismissal. "You have natural talent. But talent without discipline and perspective is just unrealized potential." Reynolds absorbed her words, his expression shifting from resentment to thoughtful consideration. "How do I get that perspective without waiting 20 years? Find mentors who've walked the path before you. Listen more than you speak. Recognize that being the best means constantly learning, not assuming you already know everything." Grace smiled slightly. "And work on your marksmanship. Your last qualification scores showed inconsistency at distance." The young officer's cheeks colored slightly at the direct critique, but he nodded. "I'll work on it." "Good. The department needs officers like you, but it needs the best version of you, not just a talented version." Reynolds extended his hand. "Good luck with the federal unit, Sergeant. Maybe I'll see you there someday." Grace shook his hand, recognizing the small but significant shift in his perspective. "Maybe you will." The next 10 days passed in a whirlwind of transition meetings, documentation preparation, and farewell gatherings with colleagues who had become friends over decades of service. Grace approached each task with the same methodical thoroughness she applied to investigations, ensuring nothing would be overlooked in her departure. On her final day, the department organized an impromptu ceremony in the briefing room. Officers from every division gathered to mark her transition, many sharing stories of how her guidance had shaped their careers, or her insights had helped crack difficult cases. Chief Wilson, who had preceded Bennett as tactical commander, presented her with a commemorative plaque recognizing her service. "The measure of an officer isn't just in the cases they solve," he said, addressing the assembled department. "It's in the legacy they leave behind, the standards they establish, the wisdom they share, the example they set." Sergeant Mitchell has embodied the highest ideals of this department for 23 years, and while we're losing her presence, we're not losing her influence. That remains in every officer she's trained, every procedure she's improved, every life she's touched. Grace accepted the plaque with uncharacteristic emotion, looking out at the faces of colleagues who had become family. "When I joined this department, I was told that police work was about protecting and serving. What I learned over 23 years is that it's also about growing and adapting, recognizing that the challenges we face are constantly evolving, and so must we." She paused, meeting the eyes of younger officers who represented the department's future. "Experience isn't valuable because it makes you rigid in your ways. It's valuable because it teaches you how to keep learning, how to keep improving, long after others might have decided they know enough." Her gaze found Reynolds near the back of the room, listening with unusual attentiveness. "I'm not leaving because this department has nothing left to teach me. I'm leaving because what I've learned here has prepared me to make a broader impact. And that's the greatest gift any organization can give its people, the foundation to keep growing beyond its walls." The gathering concluded with personal goodbyes, exchanged contact information, and promises to stay connected. Grace cleaned out her desk, packing 23 years of accumulated memories into 2 cardboard boxes. The framed commendations, the photographs of successful operations, the small tokens of appreciation from community members whose lives she had impacted, each represented a chapter in a career defined by persistence and excellence. As she carried the boxes to her car, she passed the shooting range where her confrontation with Bennett had begun this unexpected journey. Through the reinforced glass, she could see Reynolds practicing alone, methodically working on his long-distance accuracy with the kind of focused determination she had tried to instill. Grace smiled to herself, recognizing that sometimes the most important legacy wasn't in grand achievements, but in the small seeds planted that would continue growing long after departure. She had changed Reynolds' perspective more profoundly than any formal reprimand or dismissal could have, showing him through example that talent was merely the beginning, not the end, of professional development. The drive home felt symbolic, a transition between phases of life rather than just a commute. Grace's apartment was already partially packed, the essentials ready for the move to Quantico in 3 days. The rest would follow once she was established in her new position. As she entered her living room, her phone chimed with an incoming message. Reeves had sent an updated roster for the new Behavioral Analysis Unit 8 agents selected from across the Bureau's divisions, each bringing specialized expertise that would complement Grace's leadership. The team was taking shape, a blend of experience and fresh perspective that reflected exactly what she had advocated throughout her career. Another message followed moments later, an invitation to tour the temporary facilities at Quantico upon her arrival, followed by a formal introduction to the FBI's executive leadership. The significance wasn't lost on Grace. 3 weeks ago, she had been fighting against forced retirement. Now she was being welcomed into the highest levels of federal law enforcement as a valued expert and leader. Grace set her phone aside and moved to the window overlooking the city she had protected for more than 2 decades. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the urban landscape and illuminating the skyline with golden light. It was, she realized, the perfect metaphor for this transition, not an ending, but a moment of illumination before a new beginning. Her career wasn't ending at age 48. It was evolving, transforming into something that would leverage everything she had learned while creating space for new growth and development. The very qualities that Bennett had seen as limitations, her age, her established methodologies, Her measured approach had become her greatest strengths in an environment that valued depth of experience. Grace turned from the window and continued packing, each item carefully wrapped and placed in boxes labeled for her new life. She was leaving behind a department that had shaped her, colleagues who had become family, and a community she had sworn to protect. But she was carrying forward the wisdom gained through years of service, the insights earned through perseverance, and the confidence that came from proving herself repeatedly against increasingly difficult challenges. The journey ahead would demand everything she had developed throughout her career: analytical precision, tactical awareness, psychological insight, and the patience to build something meaningful and lasting. The new behavioral analysis unit wouldn't just be catching killers like Davidson. It would be creating a framework for understanding and interdicting mission-oriented offenders before they claimed their first victims. As darkness fell outside her window, Grace completed her preparations with methodical thoroughness. Tomorrow would bring the final arrangements before her departure. 3 days later, she would step into her new role at Quantico, beginning a chapter that no one, not Bennett, not her colleagues, perhaps not even herself, had imagined possible just weeks earlier. The forced retirement that had loomed on her horizon had transformed into an opportunity that would extend and expand her impact beyond anything she could have achieved in her original department. The challenge that had threatened to end her career had instead elevated it to national significance. Grace smiled to herself as she sealed the final box. Sometimes the most important shots weren't the ones you planned meticulously. Sometimes they were the ones you took when all other options seemed exhausted, when you had nothing to lose and everything to gain by proving what you were truly capable of achieving. 6 months later, Grace stood at a podium in Quantico's main auditorium, facing 70 law enforcement officers from across the country. The Behavioral Analysis Unit's first national training program had drawn participants, ranging from veteran detectives to rising tactical commanders, all seeking to understand the methodology that had captured Davidson and was now reshaping how federal agencies approached mission-oriented offenders. The fundamental mistake in traditional profiling, Grace explained, advancing to the next slide in her presentation, is assuming that mission-oriented offenders are primarily motivated by the same factors that drive other violent criminals: power, control, sexual gratification, or rage. What we've discovered is that for a significant subset of these offenders, the motivation is mastery itself, the need to accomplish something that proves their exceptional abilities. She clicked to a slide showing Davidson's shooting positions across 6 crime scenes, the increasing complexity and difficulty evident in each subsequent location. Davidson wasn't just killing targets, he was completing missions of escalating difficulty. Each success required the next attempt to be more challenging. It's the same psychological drive we see in elite athletes, master musicians, or specialized military units, except channeled into destruction rather than creation. A hand raised in the middle row. Grace recognized Commander Bennett, who had surprisingly registered for the training program 3 weeks earlier. His presence had initially been disconcerting, but she'd come to appreciate the symbolic value of having her former supervisor witnessing her success. Unit Chief Mitchell, Bennett corrected himself. How do you distinguish between this mastery-driven offender profile and someone who's simply escalating due to decreased satisfaction from previous crimes? The question was astute, exactly the kind of critical analysis Grace had been trying to foster throughout the week-long program. Bennett had been surprisingly engaged, setting aside his earlier dismissiveness to genuinely learn from the curriculum. Excellent question, Grace acknowledged. The distinction lies in how they approach the escalation. Satisfaction-seeking escalation typically involves increasing violence or risk to achieve the same emotional response. Mastery-driven escalation involves increasing technical difficulty while maintaining consistent methodology. Davidson didn't increase the brutality of his attacks, he increased the precision required to execute them successfully. Bennett nodded, making notes with the same focused attention he'd shown throughout the training. Whatever his personal feelings might be, his professional curiosity had overcome his pride. Grace continued the presentation, moving through the psychological indicators, behavioral patterns, and investigative approaches that had become the foundation of the unit's methodology. The work over the past 6 months had transformed intuitive insights into structured protocols that could be taught, replicated, and refined by law enforcement agencies nationwide. The critical breakthrough in the Davidson case wasn't just understanding his psychology, Grace explained. It was recognizing that his need for mastery would override his established pattern. He was willing to break his own rules to achieve a more impressive accomplishment. She advanced to a comparison of Davidson's previous shooting positions with the Adams Building location. This is why he shifted from his preferred 1,000 to 1,200 yard range to attempt a 1,423-yard shot. The increased difficulty represented a level of mastery that would validate his self-image as exceptional. Understanding that drive allowed us to anticipate his actions rather than merely reacting to them. As the presentation concluded, Grace opened the floor for final questions. An FBI tactical commander from the Seattle field office raised his hand. "Unit Chief Mitchell, your approach clearly worked with Davidson, but how generalizable is it? Can we really anticipate the actions of these offenders with enough precision to prevent attacks rather than just respond to them?" "That's the fundamental question we're exploring," Grace acknowledged. "In the 6 months since establishing the unit, we've applied this methodology to 17 active cases. In 12 instances, we successfully anticipated the offender's next action with sufficient accuracy to prevent it. In 3 cases, we narrowed the possible scenarios enough to significantly enhance the response when the attack occurred. And in 2 cases, we were wrong." She paused, letting the statistics register with the audience. "Perfection isn't the standard we're pursuing. Improvement is. If we can prevent even half of these incidents through better anticipation, we've saved lives that would otherwise be lost." The tactical commander nodded, satisfied with the honest assessment. In law enforcement, particularly at the federal level, the temptation to oversell results was constant. Grace's candor about both successes and failures had earned the unit credibility that glossy statistics never could. As the session ended, participants gathered their materials and began filing out of the auditorium. Many stopped to thank Grace personally, sharing cases from their jurisdictions that might benefit from the unit's analysis. The network she was building would extend the unit's impact far beyond its direct casework. Bennett lingered until the crowd thinned, then approached the podium where Grace was organizing her presentation materials. "That was impressive," he said, the acknowledgement coming more easily than it would have 6 months earlier. "Your team has accomplished more in half a year than most specialized units achieve in their first 3. "Thank you, Commander. It's been an intense learning curve for all of us." Bennett nodded, seeming to wrestle with something. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. 6 months ago, I was ready to push you into retirement based on assumptions that had nothing to do with your capabilities." The directness of the admission surprised Grace. Bennett had never been known for acknowledging mistakes, particularly ones rooted in his own biases. "What changed your perspective?" she asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. "Watching Reynolds struggle without your guidance, for one thing." Bennett shook his head ruefully. "He has all the natural talent in the world, but he lacks the judgment that comes from experience. I started to see what we'd be losing if we pushed out our veteran officers simply because younger replacements were available." The acknowledgement was professionally satisfying in a way that even her federal appointment hadn't been. Bennett wasn't just recognizing Grace's individual value, he was reassessing the systemic ageism that had nearly ended her career. "And then there was Davidson," Bennett continued. "When the full case details became available, it was obvious that no one on our tactical team would have made the connections you did. Your intuitive understanding of his psychology wasn't just helpful, it was the difference between success and failure. Grace considered his words, appreciating the professional humility they represented. The irony is that I wouldn't have been on that case if you hadn't tried to push me out. Sometimes the obstacles we face end up redirecting us to where we're supposed to be. Bennett smiled slightly. That's a generous way to frame my mistake. It's an accurate way to frame what happened. I wouldn't be leading this unit if I hadn't been fighting for my professional survival. That struggle forced me to demonstrate capabilities that might otherwise have remained untapped. They walked together toward the auditorium exit, their professional relationship transformed by the events of the past 6 months. The adversarial dynamic had given way to something approaching mutual respect. Bennett acknowledging the value of experience, Grace recognizing the growth in his perspective. Reynolds asked about you, by the way, Bennett said as they reached the lobby. He's been working on his marksmanship qualifications. Improved his long-distance accuracy by 40% over the past 4 months. Grace smiled, pleased that the seeds she'd planted were taking root. Sometimes the most valuable lesson isn't technical skill, but the recognition that mastery requires continuous improvement, not just natural ability. That seems to be the theme of your training program as well. Bennett extended his hand. Thank you for including me, despite our history. It's been illuminating. Grace shook his hand, the professional gesture symbolizing a reconciliation neither had anticipated. The unit's mission is to transform how law enforcement understands and responds to these offenders. That transformation has to include everyone, especially those in leadership positions who influence departmental culture. As Bennett departed with the other training participants, Special Agent Dunham approached from the back of the auditorium where she'd been observing the session. That looked like a productive conversation, she noted, having witnessed the exchange with Bennett. More productive than I would have expected 6 months ago, Grace acknowledged. People can surprise you when given the opportunity to grow beyond their limitations. Speaking of surprising growth, Dunham said, Director Reeves asked me to bring you this. She handed Grace a sealed envelope bearing the FBI Director's Office insignia. Apparently, the preliminary results from our first 6 months of operation have attracted attention at the highest levels. Grace opened the envelope, scanning the contents with growing astonishment. The memo outlined a significant expansion of the Behavioral Analysis Unit's mandate, resources, and operational authority. What had begun as an experimental task force was being established as a permanent division within the Bureau's counterterrorism structure, with increased staffing, dedicated facilities, and direct reporting lines to the director's office. This is unexpected, Grace said, processing the implications. Her temporary assignment was becoming a career-defining leadership position with national security implications. Is it, though? Dunham asked with a knowing smile. The unit has closed more high-priority cases in 6 months than most specialized divisions handle in years. You've built a methodology that's transforming how we approach these threats, and you've created a training program that's extending that transformation throughout the law enforcement community. This isn't charity, it's recognition of results. Grace reread the memo, noting the specific acknowledgement of her leadership as the driving force behind the unit's success. The same qualities that Bennett had once viewed as liabilities, her methodical approach, her analytical precision, her preference for patience over speed, were now being celebrated as essential to the unit's effectiveness. Director Reeves wants to discuss the transition with you this afternoon, Dunham added. The expanded division will need a formal leadership structure, additional personnel, and enhanced facilities. You'll have significant input into all of those decisions. Grace nodded, already mentally organizing the priorities for expansion. The unit's work had revealed gaps in how law enforcement agencies coordinated their responses to mission-oriented offenders. Addressing those gaps would require new protocols, specialized training, and technological infrastructure that could support rapid information sharing across jurisdictions. "There's one more thing," Dunham said, handing Grace a second envelope. "This arrived from your former department this morning." Grace opened it to find a formal letter from the police chief, acknowledging her selection for the department's Distinguished Service Medal, the highest honor they bestowed on officers whose contributions extended beyond ordinary duty. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month, providing an opportunity for her to return to her former department, not as someone pushed toward retirement, but as someone whose career had reached new heights. "Quite a contrast from where things stood 6 months ago," Dunham observed. "Life has a way of reshaping our paths when we least expect it," Grace replied, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "6 months ago, I was fighting to preserve my dignity in the face of forced retirement. Today, I'm building something that's changing how we protect communities across the country." They walked together toward the Bureau's main building, where Reeves would be waiting to discuss the expansion. The Quantico campus sprawled around them, a center of excellence where law enforcement professionals came to develop the skills and knowledge needed to confront evolving threats. Grace had once been an outsider here, a local police sergeant temporarily assigned to a specialized task force. Now she was becoming part of the institution's leadership, shaping its future direction through the division she was building. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Grace said as they crossed the campus. "That day on the shooting range when Bennett dismissed my abilities because of my age. If he hadn't done that, if he'd simply acknowledged my qualifications and approved my application to the sniper program, none of this would have happened." "You'd still be there," Dunham nodded. "A respected sergeant approaching retirement. Instead, his rejection forced me to prove myself in ways that revealed capabilities neither of us fully understood I possessed." Grace smiled at the irony. "The obstacle became the path." "That seems to be a recurring theme in your approach," Dunham observed. "You don't just overcome obstacles, you transform them into advantages." Davidson's need for an increasingly difficult shot became the key to anticipating his location. Bennett's dismissal of your abilities became the catalyst for demonstrating them on a national stage. Grace considered this perspective. Throughout her career, she had developed the capacity to see possibilities where others saw limitations. Age became experience, complexity became opportunity, rejection became redirection. That transformative vision was now the foundation of a methodology that was saving lives across the country. As they reached the main building, Director Reeves was waiting in the lobby, clearly pleased by Grace's reaction to the expansion memo. "I take it you've had time to review the director's decision," Reeves said, extending her hand in congratulation. "It's an extraordinary opportunity," Grace acknowledged, "and an enormous responsibility. One you've earned through demonstrated results." Reeves gestured toward the executive conference room where the planning session would take place. "The expansion isn't just about additional resources, it's about institutional recognition that your approach represents a fundamental advancement in how we address these threats." They entered the conference room to find it already occupied by senior bureau officials, division heads from related units, and technical specialists prepared to discuss the infrastructure needed to support the expanded operation. The planning session would establish the foundation for a division that would become a permanent part of the federal law enforcement landscape, a legacy extending far beyond what Grace had imagined possible when she first accepted the temporary assignment. As the meeting began, Grace was struck by the contrast between this moment and the confrontation on the shooting range that had initiated her journey. 6 months ago, she had stood alone, fighting against assumptions about her capabilities based solely on her age. Today, she sat at the center of a team of federal law enforcement leaders, all focused on implementing her vision and methodology on a national scale. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal as well. The uncertainty and defensiveness she had felt when facing Bennett's dismissal had given way to a quiet confidence born from repeated validation of her approach. She no longer needed to prove herself. Her results spoke with greater eloquence than any self-advocacy could achieve. The meeting stretched into the evening as they mapped out the expanded division structure, staffing requirements, and operational protocols. Each decision would shape how law enforcement agencies nationwide approach the growing threat of mission-oriented offenders, terrorists, ideological extremists, and tactical criminals like Davidson, whose motivations transcended conventional understanding. As the session concluded, Reeves walked Grace back to her office, where the evidence boards from current cases lined the walls. Each represented lives at risk, communities under threat, and the opportunity to prevent tragedy through deeper understanding of the psychological dynamics driving these dangerous offenders. "When I first recruited you from that local department," Reeves said, "surveying the complex investigative materials, I believed you had unique insights that could help us solve the Davidson case. What I didn't anticipate was that you'd transform our entire approach to these threats." Grace smiled, remembering her own uncertainty when she'd first accepted the assignment. "I was just trying to prove Bennett wrong, to show that experience had value that couldn't be quantified in physical fitness tests or reaction time measurements." "You've done far more than that," Reeves replied. "You've demonstrated that understanding the psychology of mastery isn't just academic, it's the key to anticipating and preventing these attacks before they occur. That's a legacy that will continue long after any of us have retired." The mention of retirement, once a looming threat, now carried no sting. Grace's career hadn't ended at 48. It had evolved into something more significant than she had imagined possible. The forced conclusion Bennett had planned had instead become a launching point for her most meaningful professional contribution. Grace looked at the case materials surrounding them, each representing lives that could be saved through the methodology she had developed. The path forward wasn't without challenges. Expanded operations would bring increased scrutiny, political pressures, and the inevitable resistance to new approaches. But those obstacles would become opportunities, just as Bennett's dismissal had become the catalyst for her greatest professional achievement. "I've been thinking about Reynolds lately," Grace said, her mind returning to the young officer whose cocky certainty had mirrored Bennett's dismissive attitude. "When Bennett mentioned his improved marksmanship, I realized that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our greatest disappointments." "How so?" Reeves asked. Reynolds wanted the recognition of being selected for the FBI task force, but what he needed was the humbling recognition that talent without development is just unrealized potential. My rejection helped him understand that more clearly than any commendation could have. Just as Bennett's attempt to force her retirement revealed capabilities that might have remained dormant otherwise, Reeves observed. Grace nodded, the pattern becoming increasingly clear. The obstacles we face often reveal our true capabilities more clearly than the successes we achieve easily. Davidson became exceptional because he continuously sought greater challenges. I found my true professional path because Bennett forced me to fight for recognition. They reached Grace's office, where the expansion plans would begin taking concrete form over the coming weeks. The small task force she had led for 6 months would evolve into a division that would shape federal law enforcement strategies for decades to come, all because she had refused to accept artificial limitations on her capabilities. The message to law enforcement shouldn't just be about identifying these offenders, Grace said, articulating the vision that would guide the expanded division. It should be about recognizing that mastery itself isn't the problem, it's the channel through which it's expressed. The same drive that makes Davidson deadly could make another person extraordinary in positive ways. That's a powerful perspective, Reeves acknowledged, and one that reflects your own journey. The same determination that made you fight against forced retirement has now created something that will save countless lives. Grace smiled, recognizing the truth in the observation. The shot that everyone had laughed at, her attempt to join the sniper program at 48, had set in motion a sequence of events that transformed not just her career, but the entire approach to a critical category of threats. The obstacle had become not just the path but the purpose. "Tomorrow we start building the expanded division," Reeves said as they concluded their conversation. "Your vision, your methodology, your leadership, but with resources and authority proportionate to the impact you've already demonstrated." Grace nodded, already mentally organizing the priorities for the work ahead. The journey that had begun with a stand against age discrimination had evolved into something far more significant, a transformation in how law enforcement understood and addressed some of the most dangerous offenders in modern society. As she gathered her materials to head home for the evening, Grace reflected on the distance traveled since that confrontation on the shooting range. The shot that Bennett had dismissed as a waste of time had initiated a journey that led to a national leadership position, a revolutionary methodology, and a legacy that would endure throughout the law enforcement community. Sometimes the most important shots weren't the ones that hit the target most precisely. Sometimes they were the ones that forced you to prove your capabilities when everyone else had written you off as obsolete. Those shots fired with determination rather than precision, with courage rather than certainty, often revealed possibilities that conventional success could never illuminate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.